Hi there and welcome to the Quick Start Guide for Qcad. This Quick Start Guide is a free offer from learnqcad.com website. We firmly believe in Qcad. We think it's very powerful. We think everybody should be using it. And we offer this free video tutorial to get you started quickly with using Qcad in the proper way. This video is a collection of snippets from the various training lessons. Because there's snippets, there may be some discontinuity between the adjacent topics. This little video clip is designed to teach you how to use the player. The Qcad training series is developed so it plays in a web browser. That makes it universal amongst various computer types. Right now there's a video playing. I've muted the audio. You can mute, unmute audio with this control right here. You can also set your audio volume right here. I'd recommend you leave your volume at maximum and use your system volume, such as in Windows 7 down here, to adjust your volume level. That way the volume is the same for all lessons. When you first start up Qcad, it's going to go to whatever it was last saved as. In other words, there's a configuration file, and if you change the configuration settings, then it will always honor those new settings. So first we'll close the existing Qcad. These instructions are for Windows 7. If you have a different operating system, then you'll have to find your own way to do this. But on Windows 7, if you click on your local disk, then you click on the users, then you click on your username, click on application data, click on roaming, and go down here and find Qcad. You will find a qcad3.ini. That is a configuration setting file for Qcad version 3. This is the file it uses every time it starts up. So what we're going to do, we're going to right click and delete this thing. You can delete it with your system if you have a different operating system. You can search for it, find it, and delete it. Notice it's 22 kbytes. And now that I've deleted it, I can close my file exploring program. I'll go back and restart Qcad again. Notice now we get the first start screen. I want you to get to that point. We'll use inches. We're going to use custom for default paper size, and these two stay the same. Click OK. At this point, we both have the same screen. Mine's a lot smaller than yours, most likely. But you notice this property editor is separate from the Qcad screen. So what I want to do, I want to first of all delete this layer list screen. We won't use that much in the beginning, so just click the X, it deletes it. Next I want to take the property editor, I want to bring it over here, and I want to slip it in right here beside the drawing screen. That's called docking a list. We have now docked this list. We're going to make the display full screen. Now I have a property editor that's docked over here on the right hand side. The property editor can be resized right here to give you more screen area if you want it. I usually will make it just enough to read all the words involved in the display. And that's how we place the property editor over here in a docked position. The next thing I want to do is fix the command line window. It's too big. So we click this little box over here. It gives us a command line status bar at the top. And I can just left click and drag it up here. If you notice, if I put it to the left, then it puts the command line above the property editor. If I grab the command line and pull it to the right, then it puts it in a tab. Now the command line is the top tab, the property editor is the second tab. So that's how you dock additional listings. Over here on the right, you notice this is highlighted and this one up here is highlighted. Property editor is highlighted, the command line is highlighted. That's because they're both visible on the screen. We can make it invisible by clicking that, and it just went away. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the Qcad window and all the various components that comprise the Qcad window. For example, up here across the top, we have drop-down menus, a help menu, miscellaneous window, and on across here, layers. And down here on the left-hand side, we have what's called the CAD toolbars. These tools, this is the main CAD toolbar. This is called the idle state. If you notice, you put your mouse up here, it says reset or idle. It says it right underneath it right there. It says reset idle. So this is considered the idle state when no tools are selected. So to select a tool, you simply select a line, a circle, whatever you want to draw. We'll pick a line. Let's do a rectangle from 2 points. So we're going to, now once we choose our tool, I notice up here it shows the tool as a rectangle using 2 points. Now we have this thing called the snap grid, the snap choices I should say. And we're going to snap the 2 points to the grid so the mouse can only go to different points on the grid. So there's the first point of the rectangle, another point on the grid, the dots, is the second point of the rectangle. So now we've drawn a rectangle, but it was forced to follow these grid marks, these grid points. So that's what the snap tools do. The snap tools control where you can place entities on the drawing area. So that brings us to the drawing area as the next topic. This is the drawing area here, the black area. We have rulers across the top for the X dimension, rulers on the left side for the Y dimension. Over here we have our mouse status. It tells us what to do next. If I'm up here trying to draw a line, notice it says click for the next point on the left side or click on the right side when you finish. So if I get my mouse to another snap point, left click, it continues the line. If I'm finished, I right click and the line's finished. Now it's saying I can start the first point of a new line. So I can start the first new line here. It says do the next point. It says do the next point. So I can put the end of that line there. It says next point. And then right click when you're finished because it says when you're done, right click. So I right click and I'm finished. Now it's ready to do the first point of the next line. So it's a little status thing. It pretty much tells you what to do with your mouse. And it'll be very useful as we go through all these training lessons. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the coordinate system that Qcad uses to place entities on the drawing area. I'm going to start a line here, and I'm going to flip down here and notice that this is the absolute Cartesian coordinates, X and Y values. This is the absolute polar coordinates, which is a line length with an angle. Down here we have the relative Cartesian coordinates, which is X and Y values. And we also have relative polar coordinates, which is a certain dimension at a certain angle. So those are the 4 types of coordinate systems we use in Qcad. This little red crosshairs down here, that's called the absolute coordinate center of this drawing. So I'm going to move that center over towards the center of the drawing area. And now, if you notice the rulers up here, the XY rulers, they go -5, +5. The Y rulers go -10, +10. So each dot represents 1 inch, which it says down here, and each line represents a jump of 10 inches. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw a line here. We're going to click right here, one end of the line, and put the other end of the line right there. Now what we're going to do is break out of this, and notice there's a little yellow circle here. This little yellow circle follows my mouse around. That's the snap circle. That's the nearest thing that it can snap to based on my current mouse position. If I move my mouse to the beginning of this line, that grid snap point, notice down here where it's right now it says -20, -6. That's because that's where my mouse left the paper. Left the paper right there. Now it says -20, -22. When I put the mouse at the end of the line, if you read down, you'll see it says -6, 6. That means that absolute coordinate of that point is -6 on the X dimension, -6 inches. It's +6 inches on the Y dimension, relative to the absolute center of this drawing. Down here, the other end of the line, you notice, look down there, it says +7 X value, 7 inches, and comma, it's -5 inches, which is the Y value -5. And you can see it's 5 dots below the Y center axis, and it's whatever it says. 7 dots to the right of the x-axis, center is 0. So that is the absolute Cartesian coordinate. If we go to the same points, if you look down here now at the absolute polar coordinates, you'll find that that same location has two values. Down here on the left is the XY, down here is the polar coordinate. So you notice the XY value we talked about earlier was minus 6, 6 for the X and Y values. And the polar coordinates are 8.4853 inches at an angle of 135 degrees. So that's the polar version of that dot location. Down here, the end of the line, the snap point at the end of this line, has the XY coordinates of 7 inches, minus 5 inches. And the polar coordinates are 8.6023 inches at an angle of 324.4623 degrees. So what do these angles mean? Well, the angles start out with the 0 point. If you notice right now, the angle down here, the angle is 0. So the 3 o'clock position is 0. Then the angle increases as we go around. Here we're at the 12 o'clock position, it's 90 degrees. The 9 o'clock position, it's 180 degrees, 270 degrees. And as we approach 3 o'clock position, it approaches 360 degrees, but never gets there because when you get right to it, it's back to 0. So the degrees are indicated in a counterclockwise direction relative to this x-axis on the right-hand side. So that's what the angle means. The length is simply the distance from the center of origin to wherever the snap point is. Right now the distance is 14.1421 inches at a 45-degree angle. So that's the polar coordinate method of identifying the location of either the select circle or some entity, some point of some entity that we're using to point to with the select circle. In this lesson, we're going to discuss the advantages of the command line. Over here we have property editor and command line. I'm going to draw a couple of items here. I'm going to draw a line, a 2-point line. I'm going to draw it from here up to here using the grid as the snap tool. I'm also going to draw a circle. I'm going to use center with the radius, and I'll snap it. Center be here, radius be that much right there. So now we have two entities placed on the drawing area. Let's assume that I want to add a third entity, another circle point with a radius, and normally what I would do is snap it to something. I'd snap it to either the end of one of these pre-existing objects or the center of one of these pre-existing entities. I have a lot of trouble saying entity instead of object. Entity is the proper term because it can be a cluster of several different pieces. So an entity is the right way to name this process. Or we can have the circle center point start relative to one of the grid points. But let's say for the sake of argument that we don't have any entity to reference on. We have no grid point that falls where we need the center of the circle to be. So we're going to have to place the center of the circle without a snap condition. And once we do that, we can freehand the entity, the center of the circle, any place you want to. But you notice down here, if you look at your XY coordinates down here, it's very difficult to get to an exact number just by moving your mouse around. It's almost impossible. So in this case, what we have to do is use the command line. I've already selected a tool, which was the circle with the center point and a radius. And the command line already knows that because he's waiting for the center point coordinates. So to activate the command line, I got to hit the space bar. And that places focus in this little text box here of the command line. And what focus means is that anything I type on a keyboard will go into this text box. We assume focus all the time in many situations in Windows programs. But here we have to be more concerned about it. So once I get the flashing I-beam, I know I'm in focus, I can type. So I'm going to type in where I want the center of that circle to go. And we'll say that it's 12.336 on the x-axis. And we'll say it's 13.667 on the y-axis. And hit the enter key. Notice it placed the beginning of our circle right here, the center point I should say. So that center point has a very specific location, a very precise location. And now we can notice that the command line knows that the next thing we need is the radius. It's asking for the radius. So I can either take the mouse and make the radius. I can freehand the mouse. I can now snap the mouse to something else to set the radius in increments. Or I can snap to the ends of this line to set the radius. But if we want something that doesn't meet any of the previous drawn entities or the grid, then we're going to have to type in the radius. Let's make it 4.667 units, which are inches in this case, and hit enter. Now we've placed the circle. Notice it's placed a circle exactly where we want it, exactly at that location, and an exact radius we want. And now it's waiting for another circle, center of another circle. So by hitting escape key, we'll exit that command. Now we're back to the drawing area. And what we have to do is go back here and reselect the next tool we want to use. In this lesson, we're going to discuss the entity selection process. So if I select a tool or something, let's say this line tool, and I snap it to the grids, I can't select any entities right now because I have a tool active. What I have to do is go up here and clear all the tools, which puts us in the idle state. If you remember the term, the idle state, reset our idle state. Now the selection tool works like it does in most other Windows programs. If I left click on something, it becomes selected. If I left click on something else, it deselects everything else and only selects the thing you left click. So it's very specific, it only selects one thing at a time. We can also use the shift key, hold down the shift key and add things to the selection. So we can add these two things. We can also hold down the shift key and click on a selection and remove it from the selected group. In this lesson, we're going to discuss the modify tools. I've loaded this file here which has some entities on it we're going to use. So we'll go down here and we'll click on the modification tools toolbar icon. And we're going to select an item. Let's select this circle right here. What we're going to do is come up here and move it. So when we click the move button, notice down there the mouse says select a reference point. Remember the 5 reference points on the circle? Let's just use the center reference point. So that's our reference point. Now it says a target point. That's where you're going to move it to. Let's just snap the end of lines and move the center of the circle to here, all right? So that's the target. And once we've done that, housekeeping, now it's going to say, okay, what do you want to do? Delete the original, which means just move it, or do you want to move it and keep the original, or do you want to make multiple copies? Let's do multiple copies for a second, multiple copies to see what happens. So notice it made multiple copies, and the distance from the center of this circle to the center of that circle is the same as the distance from the center of this circle to the center of the next circle. So when it copies something, it uses the same offset value for every replication. So now we have 3 circles that were drawn from the one. So I'm going to delete these 2 and move on to the next topic. Okay, for the next topic, we're going to select this complex object again. We're going to go up here and we're going to modify it. We're going to move it and rotate it at the same time. So we select that tool, it says what's your reference point. Make this upper corner my reference point, target point. Notice I can move it. Target point's going to be, let's see the end of this line up here. So we'll change our snap tool, the end of that line. So now we notice it says we can put it in rotation now. We can rotate it if we want to an additional minus 30 degrees. Delete the original and say OK. So now it's been rotated 30 degrees. It's been moved from here up to here and rotated 30 degrees. So that's how that tool is used. Next we're going to use this trim tool. We're going to do something that you're not expecting probably. Choose the limiting entity. We're going to make this arc the limiting entity. Choose entity to trim. We're going to trim this item here. Notice when I do that, it trims it right to the contact point on that arc. So let's trim again. Let's say, no, I don't want to do that. I want to trim to the middle arc. So limiting entities right there, and the entity to trim is right there. So notice it's so easy to have these limiting entities change on the same source. And that's what the trim tool does. It changes the length of an entity by some limiting entity. In this case, it was an arc, the middle arc. The next tool we want to use is called trim both. Here we have two lines. Let's say that these lines don't actually intersect, right? But what I can do, I can choose a limiting entity. This line will limit how far the other entity goes. Notice now they're connected. So this entity was stretched to the limit point defined by the other entity. So undo that, see that again. If we reverse it, then this entity would be the limiting entity, and this entity would stretch to match it. It would have the same results because they both intersect at the same point. So that's a way to connect lines that aren't connected. Next we're going to select this unusual object here. And we're going to come over here and we're going to select the Clip to Rectangle tool. So I click on that, it says first corner of the rectangle. So we'll make the first corner right there. Second corner of the rectangle is right there. And notice what I did, it clipped everything except what was within the rectangle. So that's not what I really intended to do. So we're going to undo that and try again. First corner, be down here. And notice now it removes the things that were not selected within the box. For another example of using this tool, we're going to select the multiple arcs, shift the next one, shift the third one, and then we're going to come over here and select the tool, and we're going to snap to this line for the first corner of our selection box. And we'll snap down here someplace and pass the arcs for our second corner. What that will do, that will trim the arcs so that, as you can see, we now have the arcs all stopping. I could extend this line if I wanted to, or shorten it. But the arcs are all stopping at the same intersection point of the line, or if the line were to extend. So that's how you use this command, which won't work till you select something. Clip to rectangle. We can also use it on a circle to make an arc out of a circle. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to come over here and select first corner. First corner is there. Second corner is going to be down here. And now that circle has been turned into an arc. So there's lots of versatility in these tools. In this lesson, we're going to address the AutoSnap tool. The AutoSnap tool brings into play lots of different snap considerations and limitations that we have to be concerned about. So this is a good topic. It's an extensive topic, so let's get on with it. First of all, we want to say draw a line, 2-point line, then it defaults to AutoSnap. And we're AutoSnap. And the first thing I want you to notice about AutoSnap is that it tells you what it's snapped to. Right now it's snapped to the middle of that line. Now it's snapped to the end of that line. It's snapped to a grid point. It's snapped to a reference point on that circle. Another reference point, the center reference point. Another reference point. Here we snap to the middle of the arc, end point of the arc. So anytime we have entities that are close together, this is an intersection, this is an end. This little word game that follows around the mouse, it tells you what you're snapped to. That way the auto function, since the auto function does have various things that can snap to, it keeps you alerted as to what you're currently snapped to right this moment. So that's very important. I want you to keep that in mind throughout the rest of this lesson. An AutoSnap has certain conditions that it will meet. Here's a help file within the program, and it talks about the AutoSnap tool. Snaps to the closest intersection point, closest end point, middle point, on down the line, and that sequence of priority. If you buy the book that they sell, Qcad sells, the book is much more, has many more details in it. So let's take a look at the book for a second. Notice how the book has pictures of the AutoSnap function, but to really understand it, you have to understand the reference function above it. If you remember, we earlier went through the reference function, the reference snap function. And it snaps to all these reference points that are on lines and entities when they're drawn. So these are reference points on entities, which are always there once you create an entity. Well, this AutoSnap tool, in addition to those same reference points on entities, it also snaps to the middles of lines, the middles of the centers of arcs, centers of circles, intersections. So it does these things here in addition to those reference snap points on entities. If you're interested in obtaining the book, it comes in two flavors. It has an ebook, which is a PDF file, and also has a paper physical book. And it's in French, German, and English. It can be located at ribbonsoft.com, same place you bought your Qcad. I highly recommend this book because it has much more in-depth descriptions of the tools, and it also has more in-depth procedures how to do certain drawing situations. So I highly recommend the book. If you find this training medium works for you, then you might want to consider a release of the video training series, which is about 6 hours long, and the title will be Serious About Qcad.